At my 31st birthday party, surrounded by family and friends in my backyard, my sister Diana stood up during dinner and handed me an elegantly wrapped gift box. Everyone applauded as I tore open the paper expecting something heartfelt. Instead, I found a detailed invoice printed on official letterhead, total amount owed for gifts received over 31 years, $29,000. The entire table erupted in cheers and laughter, thinking it was some elaborate joke, but Diana's stone-cold expression told me this was dead serious. The silver wrapping paper fell to the ground as I stared at the document in disbelief. My name, Bart Thompson, was printed at the top in bold letters, followed by line after line of itemized entries. Birthday gifts from age 5 through 30, Christmas presents spanning decades, graduation money, help with college textbooks, even the $20 she gave me for gas when I drove her to the airport last month. My wife Jessica leaned over my shoulder, her smile fading as she read the meticulously organized spreadsheet. "Diana, this is incredible," she whispered, but her voice carried uncertainty rather than admiration. The backyard fell silent except for the crackling of our fire pit and the distant sound of neighborhood kids playing. 37 people sat around mismatched tables I'd borrowed from our church, all eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before them. Paper plates held half-eaten barbecue, and red Solo cups sat abandoned as everyone processed what they were witnessing. My mother Patricia broke the silence with nervous laughter. "Honey, you've always been so organized, but this is taking it a bit far, don't you think?" Diana smoothed her navy blue dress and stood straighter. "Mom, I'm 33 years old, and I've given Bart gifts for 26 years without expecting anything in return. But I've realized that generosity should have limits, and I need to start prioritizing my own financial future." My father, Robert, set down his beer bottle with more force than necessary. "Diana Marie, what in God's name has gotten into you? This is your brother's birthday celebration." "Exactly," Diana replied, her voice steady and rehearsed. "What better time to settle old debts than on the anniversary of the day this all began?" I looked up from the invoice, my hands trembling slightly. The document was professionally formatted, complete with dates, descriptions, and calculated interest for items over 5 years old. At the bottom in bold red text, it stated, "Payment due within 60 days of receipt. Late fees will be assessed at 15% per month." Marcus, Diana's husband of 4 years, placed his hand on her shoulder with obvious pride. "I told her she was too generous for too long," he announced to the crowd. "Diana's finally learning to value her own contributions." The invoice listed everything I could remember and dozens of things I'd forgotten. The Nintendo Game Boy she bought me for my 10th birthday, $89. The suit she helped me pick out for my college interviews, $215. The coffee maker she gave Jessica and me for our housewarming, $67. Each entry included the original price adjusted for inflation using some economic formula I didn't understand. My cousin Jennifer, sitting at the table closest to us, leaned forward with curiosity. "Diana, how long did this take you to put together?" 3 months of dedicated research," Diana answered without hesitation. "I went through old credit card statement store receipts I'd saved and even called some retailers to verify historical pricing. I wanted to be absolutely fair and accurate." Jessica squeezed my arm gently, a gesture that somehow made the surreal situation feel more real. "Bart, are you okay?" she asked quietly. I wasn't okay. My sister had just handed me a bill for nearly $30,000 in front of my entire extended family, treating it like some brilliant revelation rather than an utterly insane demand. But more than that, something in her demeanor suggested this wasn't a spontaneous decision or a poorly thought-out joke. This was calculated, planned, and executed with the precision of a business transaction. "Diana," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice level, "you can't be serious about this." She tilted her head slightly, the same gesture she'd made as a child when she was absolutely certain she was right about something. I'm completely serious, Bart. I've spent years giving you gifts while struggling to build my own savings. It's time for that dynamic to change. The conversations around us had stopped entirely. Even the kids at the far end of the yard seemed to sense the tension and had gathered closer to listen. My Uncle Frank, never one to stay quiet during family drama, cleared his throat loudly. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, shaking his head. "In 47 years of family gatherings, I've never seen anything quite like this." Diana smiled at him, seemingly taking his comment as validation. "Sometimes it takes courage to address uncomfortable truths, Uncle Frank." I stared at the invoice again, focusing on the total at the bottom, $29,437.63. The precision of it was almost more shocking than the amount itself. This wasn't a rough estimate or a symbolic gesture. This was an exact accounting of every dollar she claimed I owed her. "Where am I supposed to get $29,000 in 60 days?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Diana's expression softened slightly, but her resolve remained firm. "You'll figure it out, Bart. You always do. You're resourceful when you need to be." As I looked around the table at the faces of people I'd known my entire life, I realized that my 31st birthday had just become the most uncomfortable day I could remember. But something else was becoming clear too. If Diana thought she could ambush me with a calculated attack disguised as a gift, she had seriously underestimated how well I understood the value of keeping records. The morning after my birthday disaster, I sat at my kitchen table with Diana's invoice spread before me like evidence of a crime. Jessica had already left for her nursing shift at the hospital, and the house felt eerily quiet after the chaos of the previous evening. I'd barely slept, my mind racing through decades of memories trying to understand how my relationship with my sister had deteriorated to this point. Diana had called at 7 in the morning, her voice bright and cheerful, as if she'd just given me a wonderful surprise rather than a devastating ultimatum. "I hope you had time to review everything," she said without preamble. I wanted to explain my methodology so you'd understand how thorough I've been. I rubbed my eyes still gritty from lack of sleep. "Diana, I need you to explain what's really going on here. This can't just be about money." "It's exactly about money, Bart, and fairness, and finally setting appropriate boundaries in our relationship." She sounded like she was reading from a self-help book. "I've been keeping detailed records since I was 14 years old. Every birthday gift, every Christmas present, every time I helped you financially. I even tracked the occasions when I paid for your meals or gave you gas money." The invoice was organized chronologically, starting with a $5 toy truck she'd bought me for my 7th birthday and progressing through increasingly expensive items. What disturbed me most wasn't the amounts, but the meticulous nature of the record keeping. She'd noted not just what she'd spent, but also the occasions, the stores where she'd shopped, and even her emotional state at the time of purchase. "You wrote down how you felt when you bought me presents," I asked, scanning a column labeled Personal Investment Level. "Absolutely. I rated each gift on a scale of 1 to 10 based on the sacrifice I made to afford it and the emotional energy I invested in choosing something meaningful for you." Her voice carried the pride of someone explaining a brilliant innovation. "The teddy bear I bought you when you were hospitalized with pneumonia rated a 10 because I spent my entire allowance and walked 12 blocks in the snow to find the perfect one. I remembered that teddy bear. I'd kept it through college and only donated it to charity when Jessica and I moved in together." The thought that Diana had quantified that moment of sisterly love and turned it into a line item on an invoice made my stomach turn. Diana, gift giving isn't supposed to be a business transaction. When you give someone a present, you're not making an investment that you expect to be repaid. Says who? Her tone sharpened. Says the person who's been benefiting from my generosity for decades without ever acknowledging the financial burden it placed on me. I've calculated that I've spent an average of $943 per year on you since I turned 18. That's money I could have invested in my education, my career, or my retirement fund. The conversation was becoming more surreal by the minute. You have a college degree that mom and dad paid for, and you've been working steadily since graduation. How is buying me birthday presents preventing you from building a career? There was a long pause before Diana answered, and when she did, her voice carried a defensive edge I'd rarely heard before. My career trajectory has been more challenging than expected. The job market in marketing is extremely competitive, and I've had to make sacrifices to maintain my professional standards. Something in her phrasing struck me as odd, but before I could pursue it, she launched into a detailed explanation of her accounting system. She'd created categories for different types of gifts: basic obligation for birthday and Christmas presents, enhanced generosity for graduation gifts and special occasions, and emergency support for times when she'd helped me financially during college or my early career. The emergency support category is where the real money is, she explained, with the enthusiasm of an accountant describing a complex tax strategy. When you needed $800 for textbooks your sophomore year, when I loaned you $1,500 for your security deposit on that apartment, when I paid for your car repairs after that accident, all of that is documented with interest calculations based on what you would have paid if you'd gotten a personal loan from a bank. I pulled out a notebook and started taking notes, partly to keep track of her claims and partly to have something to do with my hands, while my sister dismantled our relationship with spreadsheet efficiency. You charged me interest on money I didn't even know I was borrowing. The interest reflects the opportunity cost of my capital, Bart. If I hadn't been supporting you, I could have been earning returns on those investments. By the time Diana finished explaining her system, I had filled 6 pages with notes. She'd tracked not just monetary gifts, but also her time and effort. Driving me to the airport was valued at $53, based on mileage wear and tear on her vehicle and her hourly wage. Helping me move apartments earned a charge of $220 for 8 hours of labor, at what she called market rates for moving assistance. The most shocking entry was near the end: emotional labor for serving as primary family liaison and maintaining relationship with brother, $450 annually for 15 years. She'd literally put a price tag on being my sister. Diana, you can't charge someone for emotional labor in a family relationship. That's not how families work. It's exactly how families should work, she shot back. For too long, women have been expected to provide unlimited emotional and practical support without compensation or recognition. I'm simply applying standard business principles to personal relationships to ensure equity and fairness. As bizarre as the conversation was, I was beginning to understand something important. This wasn't really about the money. Diana was angry about something much deeper, and the invoice was her way of expressing frustration she'd been harboring for years. "What's really bothering you?" I asked, because this level of resentment doesn't develop overnight. Another long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but no less determined. "You've always been the golden child, Bart. Everything comes easily to you. Good grades, good job, perfect wife, nice house. Meanwhile, I've been struggling to build the life I want, and it seems like everyone expects me to be grateful for the opportunity to support your success." That hit differently than the financial demands. Diana had always seemed confident and successful to me. She had a marketing degree from a good university. She'd married Marcus, who seemed devoted to her, and she lived in a beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood. The idea that she felt unsuccessful or overshadowed had never occurred to me. "Diana, you have a great life. What are you talking about?" "Do I, Bart? Do I really?" Her voice was rising again. "Look at the facts objectively. You own your home outright, you have a stable career that you love, and Jessica adores you. I'm 33 years old, still paying a mortgage on a house I can barely afford. working in a field that's increasingly unstable and watching my friends buy new cars and take vacations while I've been spending my discretionary income on your birthday presents. The resentment in her voice was so raw, it was almost painful to hear. But something about her description of her situation didn't add up. Diana and Marcus seemed to live quite comfortably. They drove nice cars, took regular trips, and their house was furnished beautifully. If money was really tight, those lifestyle choices didn't make sense. Diana, I see the photos you post on social media. You and Marcus just got back from Napa Valley last month. You drive a car that's newer than mine. If you're struggling financially, maybe you should look at your spending patterns rather than blaming the $50 you spend on my Christmas present. That trip was a gift from Marcus's parents, and my car is leased because it's more tax efficient for my business consulting work. The defensive tone was back stronger than before. You don't understand the complexities of our financial situation. Something in her explanation triggered a memory. At the birthday party, Marcus had seemed genuinely surprised by some of the amounts on Diana's invoice. When she'd mentioned the $215 for my interview suit, he'd looked confused and whispered something to her about not remembering that expense. At the time, I'd assumed he was just impressed by her record keeping, but now I wondered if there was more to it. Does Marcus know about all of these expenses? I asked carefully. Of course he knows. We discuss all major financial decisions together. But her answer came too quickly with the practiced tone of someone who'd rehearsed a response. Diana, when you bought me that coffee maker for $67, did you tell Marcus you were spending $67 on a gift for me? Or did you tell him you were buying something for your kitchen and then give it to me instead? The silence that followed was answer enough. Bart, that's a completely unfair question, and it shows how little you understand about marriage and shared finances. But I was starting to understand something else entirely. Diana hadn't just been keeping track of gifts she'd given me. She'd been creating an elaborate justification for financial behavior that maybe even she didn't fully comprehend. The invoice wasn't really about making me pay her back. It was about making herself feel better about money decisions that were more complicated than she wanted to admit. I need some time to process all of this, I told her. 60 days is a pretty tight deadline for coming up with nearly $30,000. I'm sure you'll figure something out, she said, her voice returning to the bright, cheerful tone she'd started with. You're very resourceful when you need to be. After she hung up, I sat staring at the invoice for another hour. Diana was right about one thing: I was going to figure something out, but probably not what she was expecting. 3 days after Diana's phone call, I drove to First National Bank with a box full of financial records and a growing sense that my sister's invoice was only the beginning of a much larger story. My banker, Mrs. Rodriguez, had known my family for 15 years and greeted me with the kind of concerned expression people reserve for customers who show up looking like they haven't slept in a week. Bart, you look terrible. What's going on? I spread Diana's invoice across her desk, along with my own bank statements, credit card records, and a legal pad covered with notes. I need to reconstruct my financial relationship with my sister going back about 10 years. She's claiming I owe her $29,000 for gifts, but I have a feeling the real story is more complicated than that. Mrs. Rodriguez put on her reading glasses and examined Diana's invoice with the careful attention of someone who'd seen every type of family financial dispute imaginable. This is quite detailed, she said diplomatically. How accurate would you say these numbers are? That's what I'm trying to figure out. I remember most of these gifts, and the amounts seem roughly correct. But I'm starting to realize I've been financially generous with Diana too, and I never kept records the way she did. What I discovered in 3 days of digging through my financial history was both embarrassing and enlightening. I'd always thought of myself as reasonably organized with money, but compared to Diana's meticulous record keeping, I was practically careless. I had years of bank statements showing payments to Diana or expenses related to her, but I'd never categorized them or thought of them as loans or gifts that might need to be repaid. Mrs. Rodriguez helped me organize my findings chronologically. In 2018, I'd written Diana a check for $8,000 to help with what she'd called temporary cash flow issues. The memo line simply read, "Family loan." In 2019, I'd paid her car insurance for 6 months when she was between jobs, a total of $1,200. In 2020, I'd covered her portion of our parents' anniversary party, which had cost me $3,400. "Did she ever pay any of this back?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked. "Some of it. Maybe. I honestly wasn't keeping track. I pulled out a folder of cash deposits that didn't correspond to my salary or other regular income. These might be partial repayments, but I have no way to know for sure." The more we dug into my records, the more complicated the picture became. I'd been financially generous with Diana, but I'd also been sloppy about documenting our transactions. She'd been meticulous about tracking what she gave me, while apparently being much less organized about tracking what she received. "Bart, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." Mrs. Rodriguez leaned back in her chair. "In your opinion, did Diana ever give you the impression that her gifts to you were loans that she expected to be repaid? I thought about every birthday, every Christmas, every time she'd handed me money or bought me something I needed. Never. Not once. She would always say things like, 'I saw this and thought of you,' or 'I wanted to get you something nice.' There was never any mention of repayment or keeping track of the amounts. And when you gave her money or paid for her expenses, what was your understanding of those transactions? I always assumed they were gifts or family support. She's my sister. When she needed help, I helped her. I never thought of it as creating debt or expecting formal repayment." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I've been working in banking for 23 years, and I've seen a lot of family financial disputes. This situation is unusual because Diana's approach is so businesslike. Most family money conflicts are emotional and disorganized. This feels different." She was right. Diana's invoice wasn't the product of sudden anger or a moment of frustration. It was the result of years of planning and calculation. But what bothered me most was the disconnect between Diana's careful tracking of her own generosity and her apparent disregard for mine. "Mrs. Rodriguez, what would you do if you were in my situation? I'd want to understand the full scope of the financial relationship before responding to her demands. You're being asked to pay nearly $30,000 based on her records alone. You have the right to present your own accounting of the situation." I spent the next 2 hours with Mrs. Rodriguez and her assistant, reconstructing my financial history with Diana as completely as possible. We found records of direct payments, shared expenses I'd covered alone, and dozens of smaller transactions that individually seemed insignificant but collectively painted a picture of consistent financial support flowing in both directions. By the end of our session, my counter-accounting showed that I'd given or lent Diana approximately $43,000 over the same period covered by her invoice. Even accounting for the partial repayments I could identify, she still owed me roughly $31,000. "This is incredible," I said, staring at our spreadsheet. "She owes me more money than she's claiming I owe her." "It appears that way based on the records. We can verify." Mrs. Rodriguez agreed carefully. "But Bart, I want you to consider something important. If you present this information to Diana, you'll be escalating the situation significantly. Right now, this is a family disagreement about the nature of gifts and obligations. If you turn it into competing financial claims, it becomes something much more serious." She was absolutely right, but I was beyond caring about escalation. Diana had publicly humiliated me in front of my entire family with a calculated attack designed to make me look like an ungrateful mooch. If she wanted to treat our relationship like a business transaction, she was going to get the full business treatment. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I need copies of everything we've documented today, and I think I'm going to need a lawyer." "Bart, before you go down that road, maybe you should try talking to Diana one more time. Show her what you've found and see if you can work this out privately. Legal involvement will make this situation much more expensive and much more destructive to your family relationships. I appreciated her caution, but Diana had already made this situation destructive. The invoice she'd presented at my birthday party wasn't just a financial demand, it was a public declaration that she viewed our entire relationship through the lens of profit and loss. If that's how she wanted to play it, I was prepared to show her how that game actually worked. I'll give her one chance to withdraw the invoice and apologize, I said. But if she insists on treating me like a debtor, I'm going to respond like a creditor. Mrs. Rodriguez printed everything we'd assembled and helped me organize it into a folder that mirrored the professional presentation of Diana's invoice. Bart, whatever you decide to do, remember that she's still your sister. Try to find a way to resolve this that doesn't permanently damage your relationship. I thanked her for the advice, but I wasn't sure our relationship could be salvaged. Diana had spent years calculating the cost of being my sister and had concluded that I owed her money for the privilege. That level of resentment and distorted thinking didn't develop overnight, and it probably couldn't be resolved with a simple conversation about accounting discrepancies. As I drove home with my folder of financial evidence, I realized that Diana's invoice had revealed something I'd been blind to for years. My sister didn't see me as family. She saw me as a business opportunity that had been insufficiently profitable. The question now was whether I was going to let her continue operating under that delusion. 2 weeks after my banking session with Mrs. Rodriguez, I drove to Willow Creek Country Club, the elegant venue where Diana and Marcus had celebrated their wedding 4 years earlier. I'd told Jessica I was meeting a potential client there, which wasn't entirely a lie, since I was gathering information that would definitely be useful in my response to Diana's invoice. The country club sat on 200 acres of manicured lawns and gardens, with a clubhouse that looked like something from a magazine about Southern luxury. Diana had always described choosing this venue as the fulfillment of her childhood dreams, but something Marcus had said at my birthday party kept nagging at me. When Diana mentioned the wedding expenses on her invoice, he'd looked genuinely confused and muttered something about thinking her parents had paid for everything. I'd made an appointment with Jennifer Walsh, the event coordinator, who had handled Diana's wedding under the pretense of planning my own renewal ceremony with Jessica. Jennifer was a petite woman in her 40s with the kind of organized energy that successful event planners seem to radiate. "Congratulations on your upcoming anniversary," she said, as we settled into her office overlooking the golf course. "How long have you been married?" 6 years this October. My wife is a nurse, and we've been so busy with our careers that we never had the big celebration we originally wanted. I'd rehearsed this story, mixing enough truth with fiction to sound believable. Jennifer opened a leather portfolio and pulled out sample photographs of recent weddings. "I completely understand. Many couples come to us wanting to create the celebration they couldn't afford earlier in their marriage. Do you have any particular style in mind?" "Actually, my sister got married here about 4 years ago, and we loved everything about her reception. Diana Thompson, though her married name is Diana Brooks now." Jennifer's face lit up with recognition. "Oh yes, I remember Diana's wedding very well. It was absolutely beautiful, one of our most elegant fall celebrations. The bride was so particular about every detail, which I always appreciate in a client. She's always been a perfectionist. I remember being impressed by how much she and Marcus had saved up for their dream wedding." I watched Jennifer's expression carefully as I spoke. "Well, actually," Jennifer said, then paused and looked uncertain. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't discuss other clients' financial arrangements. What I can tell you is that we worked very hard to create exactly what Diana envisioned within her budget parameters." The way she'd started to correct my assumption about Diana and Marcus saving up for the wedding told me I was on the right track. "I completely understand professional discretion. I was just impressed by their financial planning because my sister had been between jobs for a while before the wedding. It must have taken incredible discipline to save for such an elegant celebration." Jennifer looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Mr. Thompson, I really can't discuss the specifics of how Diana's wedding was funded, but I can show you the packages we offer and help you understand what might work for your celebration. I let her show me 3 different package options while I considered how to get the information I needed without putting her in an impossible position. Finally, I decided on a direct approach that didn't require her to violate client confidentiality. Jennifer, I'm going to be completely honest with you about why I'm here. My sister recently presented me with an invoice claiming I owe her money for gifts she's given me over the years. But I've been going through my own financial records, and I'm finding payments I made that I can't fully account for. I'm wondering if I might have contributed to her wedding expenses without realizing it at the time. Jennifer's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. Oh my, that's a very delicate situation. I'm not asking you to tell me anything about Diana's financial arrangements. But if you could help me understand how payments were made for her wedding, I might be able to figure out whether I was involved. I have bank statements showing some large transfers around that time period. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing her professional obligations against the unusual circumstances. Finally, she pulled out a different folder from her filing cabinet. Mr. Thompson, I can't discuss your sister's financial information, but I can show you the different ways clients typically handle payment for our services. Some couples pay from joint accounts, some have family contributions, and some use multiple sources of funding. She spread out several sample invoices with the identifying information redacted. For example, this couple had their reception paid for by 3 different sources, the bride's parents covered the venue, and catering the groom's family handled flowers and music, and the couple themselves paid for photography and additional decorations. I studied the samples, understanding that Jennifer was trying to help me without violating her confidentiality obligations. So it would be possible for someone to pay for part of a wedding without the groom realizing it. It's not uncommon for family members to contribute to wedding expenses without the bride or groom having complete visibility into all the financial arrangements. Sometimes parents or siblings want to give a gift quietly, and sometimes couples prefer to handle certain logistics separately to reduce stress during the planning process. That confirmed what I was beginning to suspect. I pulled out my bank statements and found the transactions I was looking for: a payment of $8,000 in September 4 years ago, and another payment of $7,000 the following month, both to Wedding Vendor Services, LLC. Jennifer, do you recognize this company name, Wedding Vendor Services, LLC? She looked at the bank statement and nodded. That's our processing company for certain types of payments. Clients who use multiple funding sources sometimes find it easier to consolidate payments through our vendor management system. $15,000. I'd paid $15,000 toward Diana's wedding, but I had no memory of agreeing to that expense. I remember Diana asking me for help with some wedding logistics and giving her access to my account for what I thought was a temporary cash flow issue, but I'd never imagined she was using my money to pay for major wedding expenses. Jennifer, hypothetically, if someone had access to another person's bank account and used it to make payments without fully disclosing what those payments were for, would your company have any record of that? Jennifer looked genuinely concerned now. Mr. Thompson, that would be a very serious situation. All of our payment records include authorization signatures and contact information for the account holders. If there were any irregularities in how payments were authorized, we would certainly want to investigate. I felt my heart rate increasing as the implications became clear. Would it be possible for me to get copies of the payment authorizations for my account? If I made payments for Diana's wedding, I should have signed authorization forms, right? Absolutely. Any payment over $500 requires written authorization from the account holder, including identification verification. If you'd like, I can pull those records right now. Jennifer left me alone in her office for 10 minutes while she retrieved the payment files. When she returned, she was carrying a folder with a troubled expression on her face. Mr. Thompson, I found the authorization forms for the payments from your account. I think you need to see these. She handed me 2 documents, both bearing forged versions of my signature. The handwriting was clearly Diana's, and the contact information listed was Diana's cell phone number and email address, not mine. Jennifer, I never signed these forms. This isn't my signature. I was afraid you were going to say that. Jennifer sat down heavily. Mr. Thompson, this appears to be a case of financial fraud. Your sister used your account to make payments for her wedding without your knowledge or authorization, and she forged your signature on our payment forms. The room felt like it was spinning. Diana hadn't just failed to mention that I'd helped pay for her wedding. She'd actively stolen money from my account and committed fraud to cover it up. And Marcus genuinely didn't know, because Diana had hidden the true source of the funding from him too. What do I do now? I asked. Jennifer was already reaching for her phone. First, I need to report this to our management and our legal department. This is a serious crime, and we have obligations when we discover fraudulent authorizations. Second, you should contact your bank immediately and report the unauthorized transactions. And third, you should probably consult with a lawyer about your options. As I sat in Jennifer Walsh's office, staring at my forged signature on documents that proved my sister had stolen $15,000 from me, I realized that Diana's invoice wasn't just an attempt to collect money she thought she was owed. It was a calculated attack designed to put me on the defensive while she was actually the one who owed me money and had committed fraud to get it. The question was no longer whether I was going to fight back. The question was how thoroughly I was going to expose what Diana had really been doing. Armed with evidence of Diana's wedding fraud, I spent the following weekend systematically investigating every large financial transaction I'd made over the past 5 years. What I discovered made the wedding payments look like petty theft compared to the elaborate scheme Diana had been operating. In March 2020, I transferred $45,000 from my savings account to something called Thompson Family Trust Management. The memo line on my bank statement read Dad's Care Fund, and I had a clear memory of setting up this account with Diana to handle our father's assisted living expenses when his health started declining. What I didn't remember was ever seeing Dad move into assisted living. I drove to Sunset Manor, the facility where I thought our father was living, only to be told by the admissions director that Robert Thompson had never been a resident there. In fact, they had no record of him ever applying or being evaluated for their services. "Are you sure you have the right facility?" asked Mrs. Patterson, the director. Sometimes families visit multiple places during the decision-making process. I showed her the paperwork Diana had given me when we set up the trust fund. According to the documents, Dad was supposed to move into Sunset Manor's memory care unit in April 2020, and his monthly expenses were projected at $3,800. Mrs. Patterson examined the documents with growing concern. "Mr. Thompson, these forms have been altered. See this admission date and these cost projections. They don't match our standard format and the pricing is completely wrong. Our memory care unit costs $5,200 per month, not $3,800. My hands were shaking as I called Diana from the parking lot of Sunset Manor. She answered on the fourth ring, sounding distracted. "Bart? I'm in the middle of something. Can this wait?" "Diana. I just left Sunset Manor. Dad was never a patient there." "Where is the $45,000 I put into his care fund?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Diana, are you there?" "I'm here." Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Bart, the situation with Dad's care became more complicated than we anticipated." "What situation? Where is Dad living and where is the money?" Another long pause. "Dad decided he didn't want to go to assisted living. He wanted to stay independent, so I helped him explore other options. The money has been used for his care just in a different way than we originally planned." I felt a cold fury building in my chest. "Diana, I just talked to Dad yesterday, and he's living with Aunt Marie in her guest house. He's been there for 2 years. Aunt Marie told me he moved in with her because he couldn't afford assisted living on his Social Security alone." "Bart, you're oversimplifying a very complex situation." "I'm oversimplifying, Diana. I gave you $45,000 specifically to pay for Dad's professional care, and instead of using it for that purpose, you let him move in with our 78-year-old aunt while you used the money for something else." "What did you use it for?" I used it for a down payment on our house. The admission came out in a rush, like she was ripping off a bandage. Marcus and I needed help with the down payment, and I was going to pay it back before Dad actually needed the care. I sat in my car staring at the elegant facade of the assisted living facility where my father was supposed to be receiving professional care, while my sister confessed to stealing his care fund to buy her dream house. Diana, that money wasn't yours to borrow. It was specifically designated for Dad's medical care. I was going to pay it back, Bart. I had a plan to replace the money before Dad needed it. When were you planning to pay it back? It's been 2 years, and according to your invoice, you think I owe you money instead of the other way around. My consulting business has been slower to develop than I expected, but it's starting to pick up now. I would have been able to replace Dad's money soon. Something in her phrasing triggered another realization. Diana, what consulting business Marcus told me at the party that you've been working remotely for a marketing firm in Chicago. I do work remotely. I provide consulting services to various clients, including some companies in Chicago. Diana, are you employed or are you self-employed? Because there's a big difference. I'm building my own consulting practice while maintaining relationships with several anchor clients. The evasiveness of her answer told me everything I needed to know. I called Marcus's cell phone while still sitting in the parking lot. Hey Bart, everything okay after the birthday craziness? Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer. Does Diana work for a company in Chicago, or does she have her own consulting business? She works for Midwest Marketing Solutions, has for about 3 years now. Why do you ask? What does she tell you about her income from that job? She makes decent money, around $58,000 a year, but she says the marketing industry is really volatile right now, so her hours fluctuate a lot. Some months, she works 60 hours a week. Other months, it's more like 20. I closed my eyes and tried to process what Marcus was telling me. Diana had been lying to her husband about having a steady job while actually running some kind of consulting business that apparently wasn't generating enough income to pay back the money she'd stolen from our father's care fund. Marcus, when you bought your house, where did the down payment money come from? Diana's family trust fund. Her grandfather left her money that became available when she turned 30. We were really lucky because we couldn't have afforded the down payment on our salaries alone. Our grandfather had been a factory worker who lived in a small apartment until he died. He'd never had a trust fund or any significant savings. But Marcus had no way of knowing that because Diana had created an entirely fictional family financial history to explain where their down payment money had come from. Marcus, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be really hard to hear. I spent 20 minutes explaining everything I'd discovered: the forged wedding payments, the stolen care fund money, and the lies about our family's financial history. Marcus listened without interrupting, but I could hear his breathing getting heavier as the implications became clear. Bart, are you absolutely sure about this? Because if what you're saying is true, Diana hasn't just been lying to you. She's been lying to me about pretty much everything relating to our finances. I'm sure, Marcus. I have documentation for all of it. Bank statements, forged authorization forms, and facility records showing Dad was never admitted anywhere. Oh, God. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. Our mortgage application. Diana told me she had proof of the family trust fund. She showed me official-looking documents about her inheritance. If that was all fake, then we committed mortgage fraud. The full scope of Diana's deception was becoming clear. She hadn't just stolen money from me and our father. She'd committed multiple felonies and had involved her husband in mortgage fraud without his knowledge. Marcus, you need to talk to a lawyer. And you need to have a very serious conversation with Diana about what else she's been lying about. After I hung up with Marcus, I sat in the Sunset Manor parking lot for another hour, trying to understand how my sister had become someone capable of such elaborate and sustained deception. The Diana I'd grown up with had been organized and ambitious, but not dishonest. This level of fraud required planning, manipulation, and a willingness to harm the people closest to her. My phone rang. It was Diana, and her voice was shaky when I answered. Bart, Marcus is asking me a lot of questions about our finances. What exactly did you tell him? I told him the truth, Diana, something you apparently haven't been doing for years. You don't understand the pressure I've been under trying to build the life Marcus and I deserve while dealing with family obligations and a difficult economy. Diana, you stole Dad's care money and committed mortgage fraud. This isn't about pressure or difficult circumstances. This is about crime. I was going to fix everything before anyone got hurt. I had a plan to make it all work. Your plan was to make me pay you $29,000 for gifts while you were actually the one who owed me money. That's not fixing anything, Diana. That's making it worse. The call ended when Diana started crying and hung up. But I wasn't feeling sympathy for my sister anymore. I was feeling something much colder and more focused. Diana had systematically stolen from me our father and her own husband, while maintaining the facade of being the responsible, generous sister who deserved financial compensation for her kindness. It was time to show her what real accountability looked like. On Monday morning, I walked into the law offices of Campbell and Associates with a banker's box full of evidence and a clear mission. I wanted to understand my legal options for recovering the money Diana had stolen and protecting our father from further financial exploitation. What I didn't expect was to discover that Diana had already tried to involve the same law firm in her scheme. Attorney Sarah Campbell was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who specialized in elder law and family financial disputes. Her office walls were lined with certificates and awards, and her desk was organized with the precision of someone who'd spent decades untangling complicated legal problems. Mr. Thompson, I understand you're dealing with some complex family financial issues. Why don't you start by telling me what's been going on? I opened my banker's box and began laying out the evidence chronologically: Diana's invoice, my counter documentation, the forged wedding authorizations, and the records showing the misappropriation of our father's care fund. Attorney Campbell listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished my explanation, she leaned back in her chair with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mr. Thompson, this is a very serious situation involving multiple potential felonies. But before we discuss your legal options, I need to tell you something that's going to surprise you. She opened a file cabinet behind her desk and pulled out a folder labeled Brooks Diana Consultation Only. Your sister came to see me 3 months ago wanting to discuss the legal enforceability of gift repayment demands. She had an invoice very similar to what you've just shown me, and she wanted to know if she could legally compel you to pay for gifts she'd given you over the years. My mouth fell open. You've already seen Diana's invoice. I've seen several versions of it, actually. Diana came here for 3 separate consultations, each time with a more elaborate accounting of what she claimed you owed her. She wanted me to help her draft a legal demand letter that would force you to pay. What did you tell her? Attorney Campbell's expression hardened. I told her that gift repayment demands are generally not legally enforceable, and that her approach raised several red flags that concerned me from both a legal and ethical standpoint. She opened Diana's file and showed me copies of the invoices Diana had brought to their meetings. The earliest version had claimed I owed her $18,000. The second version had increased to $24,000. The final version, which matched what she'd presented at my birthday party, claimed $29,000. Diana kept increasing the amount I asked. Not just increasing it. She was adding categories of charges that seemed designed to maximize the total rather than accurately reflect actual expenses. In her final version, she'd included things like emotional labor for maintaining family relationships and opportunity cost calculations for time spent on gift selection. Did you agree to help her collect the money? Absolutely not. I told Diana that her invoice appeared to be a harassment document rather than a legitimate financial claim, and I declined to represent her in any action related to it. Attorney Campbell flipped through her notes from the consultations with Diana. What concerned me most wasn't just the questionable legal basis for her claims, but some of the statements she made about your family's financial arrangements. She mentioned having access to your father's care funds and suggested that she'd been making decisions about his living situation that saved the family money. She told you about Dad's care fund. She mentioned it in the context of explaining how financially responsible she'd been compared to other family members. She said she'd managed to arrange more cost-effective care for your father than the expensive assisted living placement you'd insisted on. My hands were clenching into fists without my conscious control. Attorney Campbell, my father never received any professional care. Diana used his care fund to buy her house and let him move in with our elderly aunt instead. Attorney Campbell's expression shifted from concerned to alarmed. Mr. Thompson, based on what you're telling me and what I observed during my consultations with Diana, I believe your sister may be engaging in systematic elder financial abuse in addition to the fraud against you. She pulled out a fresh legal pad and started taking detailed notes. As I explained everything I'd discovered about the misappropriated care fund, Diana's lies to Marcus about her employment, and the forged documents used for the wedding payments. This is much more serious than family financial disputes, she said when I finished. Diana has potentially committed elder abuse, bank fraud, mortgage fraud, and identity theft. The complexity and duration of these schemes suggest this isn't impulsive behavior, but rather calculated criminal activity. What are my options for recovering the money and protecting my father? Attorney Campbell outlined several possible approaches ranging from civil litigation to criminal complaints with the district attorney's office. But what she recommended most strongly was immediate action to protect our father from further financial exploitation. Mr. Thompson, based on Diana's history of deception and the significant amounts of money involved, I'm concerned that she may have access to other family financial resources that could be at risk. We need to ensure your father's assets are properly protected and that Diana can't access any additional funds. She drafted a letter on official law firm letterhead demanding that Diana provide a complete accounting of all funds she'd received from family members, return the misappropriated care fund money within 10 days, and cease all contact with our father regarding financial matters. The letter also warned that failure to comply would result in both civil litigation and criminal complaints being filed. Attorney Campbell, what happens if Diana refuses to cooperate? Then we escalate to criminal charges and civil litigation. Mr. Thompson, your sister has committed multiple felonies that could result in significant prison time. The evidence you've gathered is compelling, and the pattern of behavior shows clear criminal intent rather than simple misunderstanding. As I prepared to leave her office, Attorney Campbell handed me additional paperwork to take to the bank and to our father's doctor to help protect him from further financial manipulation. One more thing, Mr. Thompson. During my consultations with Diana, she made several comments that suggested she felt entitled to family money because she believed she'd been undervalued and undercompensated for years. That kind of thinking often escalates, especially when the initial schemes start to unravel. What are you saying? I'm saying that Diana's invoice to you wasn't the end of her financial demands. It was likely the beginning of a more aggressive campaign to extract money from family members. If you don't stop this now, it's probably going to get worse. I left Attorney Campbell's office with a comprehensive legal strategy and a much clearer understanding of what I was dealing with. Diana wasn't just my sister who'd made some poor financial decisions. She was a calculating criminal who'd been systematically defrauding her own family while maintaining the facade of being the responsible, generous one who deserved compensation for her sacrifices. The invoice she'd presented at my birthday party wasn't a request for payment. It was the opening move in what she'd planned as a systematic financial attack on her own family. But Diana had made one critical mistake. She'd assumed I would be too embarrassed or too passive to fight back effectively. She was about to learn how wrong she'd been. 2 days after meeting with Attorney Campbell, I began orchestrating the most important family gathering of my adult life. I called it a financial reconciliation meeting, when I invited everyone, explaining that Diana and I needed to resolve our invoice dispute in front of the family to ensure transparency and fairness. My parents were confused but agreed to attend. My Uncle Frank and Aunt Marie, who'd been housing our father, were eager to participate after I'd privately explained some of what I'd discovered. Marcus accepted immediately, telling me that he and Diana needed to have serious conversations about their financial situation anyway. Diana was more reluctant, but ultimately agreed when I told her I was prepared to discuss payment arrangements for her invoice and wanted the family to witness our agreement. I rented a private dining room at Riverside Restaurant for Sunday afternoon, telling everyone that I wanted this conversation to happen in a neutral location where we could focus on resolving our differences constructively. What I didn't tell anyone was that I'd also invited Attorney Campbell to attend as my legal counsel and witness. The night before our family meeting, I sat at my kitchen table with Jessica, organizing my evidence into presentation folders for each family member. Jessica had been watching my investigation unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. "Bart, are you absolutely sure you want to do this publicly?" she asked. "Once you put all this information in front of the family, there's no taking it back." Diana chose to make this public when she handed me her invoice in front of everyone at my birthday party. She wanted to humiliate me and make me look like an ungrateful brother who'd been taking advantage of her generosity for years. Jessica picked up Diana's original invoice and shook her head. "I still can't believe she actually calculated interest on gifts and charged you for emotional labor. What was she thinking?" "She was thinking that she could manipulate the family narrative to make herself look like the victim while positioning me as the person who owed money. It was a calculated attack designed to put me on the defensive while she continued stealing money from our family." I'd spent the week since meeting with Attorney Campbell preparing for this confrontation, with the same methodical approach Diana had used to create her invoice. Every claim I was going to make was documented with bank records, official correspondence, or witness testimony. Every accusation was supported by evidence that could stand up in court if necessary. The presentation I'd prepared was organized into 4 sections: Diana's false claims, her actual debts to me, her criminal activity, and the steps necessary to protect our father from further financial exploitation. Each family member would receive a folder containing copies of the relevant documents, and Attorney Campbell would be present to explain the legal implications of Diana's behavior. "What do you think Diana will do when you present all this evidence?" Jessica asked. "I honestly don't know. She might deny everything, she might break down and confess, or she might try to turn it around and blame me for invading her privacy or being vindictive. But it doesn't matter what she does because the evidence speaks for itself." I'd also prepared a written statement that I planned to read to ensure I covered all the important points without getting derailed by emotions or interruptions. The statement laid out the timeline of Diana's deceptions, quantified the financial damage to our family, and presented specific demands for restitution and behavioral changes. Sunday morning, I woke up with the kind of nervous energy I used to feel before important presentations at work. But this wasn't about closing a business deal or impressing clients. This was about exposing systematic criminal behavior within my own family and protecting people I loved from further victimization. Jessica made breakfast while I reviewed my notes one final time. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. "I'm ready." Diana spent years planning her attack on our family's finances while maintaining the facade of being the generous, responsible sister. She's been living a lie for so long that she probably believes her own story about being underappreciated and undercompensated. What if the family doesn't believe you? What if they think you're being vindictive or exaggerating? Then Attorney Campbell will explain the legal reality of what Diana has done, and they'll understand that this isn't about family drama. This is about crime. I arrived at Riverside Restaurant 30 minutes early to set up the private dining room. I arranged the evidence folders at each place setting and positioned a small easel with a timeline chart showing Diana's financial deceptions over the past 5 years. Attorney Campbell arrived 15 minutes before the family was scheduled to arrive, and we reviewed the presentation sequence one final time. "Mr. Thompson, I want to remind you that once we begin this presentation, we're essentially conducting a formal confrontation about criminal behavior. Diana may feel cornered and react unpredictably. Are you prepared for the possibility that this meeting could get very emotional? I'm prepared for anything. Diana has been manipulating and stealing from our family for years while playing the role of the victim. Today that stops. My parents arrived first looking confused by the formal setup but trying to be supportive. Uncle Frank and Aunt Marie came next, with Aunt Marie looking particularly concerned since she'd been caring for our father and had witnessed his financial struggles firsthand. Marcus arrived alone, explaining that Diana would be a few minutes late because she'd wanted to review her own financial records before the meeting. When Diana finally walked into the dining room, she was carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the same confident expression she'd had when she'd presented her invoice at my birthday party. "This is quite an elaborate setup for a family discussion," she said, taking her seat and glancing at the evidence folders. "I hope we can keep this productive and focused on finding a fair resolution." Attorney Campbell introduced herself as my legal counsel, which immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. Diana's confidence faltered as she realized this wasn't going to be a casual family conversation about gift-giving expectations. "Diana," I said, opening my presentation folder, "3 weeks ago, you presented me with an invoice claiming I owed you $29,000 for gifts you've given me over 31 years. Today, I'm going to show everyone what I discovered when I investigated your claims." I looked around the table at my family members, people I'd known and trusted my entire life. What I found is that Diana's invoice isn't just wrong about the money. It's part of a calculated deception that's been going on for years, and it's time everyone understood the truth. Diana opened her mouth to object, but Attorney Campbell raised her hand. "Ms. Brooks, I recommend you listen to the complete presentation before responding. Based on my review of the evidence, you may want to consult with your own attorney before making any statements." The confrontation I'd been planning for weeks was about to begin, and I could see in Diana's eyes that she was finally beginning to understand the scope of what she was facing. I opened my presentation folder and looked directly at Diana. "3 weeks ago, you gave me an invoice claiming I owed you $29,000 for gifts and family support. Today, I'm going to show everyone what I discovered when I investigated your claims." The silence in the private dining room was absolute except for the muted sounds of the restaurant beyond our closed door. I placed Diana's original invoice in the center of the table where everyone could see it. This invoice lists 26 years of gifts, loans, and what Diana calls emotional labor that she claims created a debt I owe to her. Every dollar amount is calculated with interest, and every interaction between us has been assigned a monetary value. My mother reached for her reading glasses and pulled the invoice closer. "Diana, honey, I don't understand." "Why would you charge your brother for Christmas presents?" Diana's voice was steady but defensive. "Mom, I've been financially generous with Bart for years while struggling to build my own savings. I was simply trying to establish fair compensation for the sacrifices I've made." I opened the first section of my evidence folder. "Diana, let's talk about sacrifices. According to my bank records over the same period covered by your invoice, I gave or lent you approximately $63,000. I distributed copies of bank statements showing transfers to Diana, payments made on her behalf, and loans that were never repaid." Marcus stared at the documents with growing alarm. $63,000, my father asked. "Bart, why didn't we know about this?" "Because Diana asked me to keep our financial arrangements private. She said she was embarrassed about needing help and didn't want the family to worry about her situation." Diana's composure was beginning to crack. "Bart, you're taking those transactions out of context. Some of that money was for legitimate shared expenses, like your wedding." I placed the forged authorization forms from Willow Creek Country Club on the table. "Diana, these are the payment authorization forms for $15,000 you charged to my account for your wedding expenses. Is this your signature or mine?" Marcus grabbed the documents and studied them closely. Diana, what is this? You told me your parents paid for the wedding. We did pay for part of it, my mother said, looking confused. We gave you $8,000 for the reception. Diana was trapped. She told Marcus that her parents paid for everything, told our parents they'd only covered part of the expenses, and hidden the fact that she'd stolen $15,000 from my account to make up the difference. There's more. I continued placing the records from our father's care fund investigation on the table. Diana, in March 2020, I transferred $45,000 to what I thought was a trust fund for Dad's assisted living care. Where is that money? Aunt Marie leaned forward with interest. Assisted living Robert has been living with me for 2 years. He told me he couldn't afford professional care on his Social Security. The revelation hit our parents like a physical blow. My mother's face went pale as she understood what I was saying. Diana, you told us Dad chose to live with Marie because he wanted to stay independent. He did choose that, Diana said weakly. The assisted living situation became unnecessary when other arrangements worked out. Attorney Campbell spoke for the first time since introductions. Ms. Brooks using funds designated for elder care for personal expenses constitutes elder financial abuse under Virginia law. It's a felony that carries significant criminal penalties. Diana finally understood that this wasn't a family disagreement about gift-giving expectations. This was a formal accusation of criminal behavior with legal consequences. Marcus was staring at his wife with a mixture of shock and betrayal. Diana, our house down payment. You told me it came from your grandfather's trust fund. Did you use this money from Bart's father to buy our house? Diana's carefully constructed facade of financial responsibility was collapsing in real time. Marcus, I can explain everything. I was going to replace Dad's money before he needed it. I had a business plan that would have generated enough income to pay everyone back. What business plan? I asked. Diana, Marcus thinks you work for a marketing company in Chicago. Do you have a job, or don't you? The silence that followed was devastating. Diana looked around the table at family members who were beginning to understand the scope of her deceptions. I've been building a consulting practice, she said quietly. It's been slower to develop than I expected, but I was going to be able to replace all the money I borrowed. Borrowed? Uncle Frank's voice was incredulous. Diana, you stole money designated for your father's medical care and used it to buy a house. That's not borrowing, that's theft. Attorney Campbell placed a formal document on the table. Ms. Brooks, this is a demand letter requiring you to provide a complete accounting of all family funds you've accessed, return the misappropriated care money within 10 days, and cease all financial contact with family members until this matter is resolved. Diana read the letter with hands that were visibly shaking. What happens if I can't pay everything back immediately? Then, we file criminal charges and civil litigation to recover the stolen funds. Attorney Campbell replied matter-of-factly. Elder financial abuse, bank fraud, mortgage fraud, and identity theft are serious felonies that carry significant prison sentences. Marcus stood up abruptly. I need to call our mortgage company. If our down payment was stolen money, we could lose our house. He looked at Diana with an expression of complete betrayal. How could you do this to our family? How could you lie about everything? Diana finally broke down completely. Years of maintaining elaborate lies while playing the role of the responsible, generous sister had taken their toll, and she sobbed as she tried to explain her motivations. I was tired of being overlooked, she said through tears. Bart always seemed to have everything so easy. Good job, perfect marriage, financial success. Meanwhile, I was struggling to build the life Marcus and I deserved, and it felt like everyone expected me to be grateful for the opportunity to support Bart's success with my own sacrifices. My mother reached across the table and took Diana's hand. Honey, we never expected you to sacrifice for Bart. We love you both equally, and we want you both to be successful and happy." "But Diana," my father added, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Stealing money from your own family and lying to your husband isn't the way to build the life you want. That's the way to destroy the relationships that matter most." Attorney Campbell outlined the steps Diana would need to take to avoid criminal prosecution, immediate repayment of the stolen funds, complete financial disclosure to Marcus and our parents, and enrollment in financial counseling to address the underlying issues that had led to her criminal behavior. "Ms. Brooks, you have 10 days to liquidate whatever assets are necessary to return the $60,000 you've taken from family members. If you can't raise the full amount, we'll need a detailed payment plan with collateral to ensure compliance." Diana looked around the table at family members who were struggling to reconcile the sister they'd known with the criminal behavior she'd been hiding. "I'll sell the house if I have to," she said quietly. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I thought I could fix everything before anyone found out what I'd done." Marcus was already on his phone with their mortgage company, trying to understand their legal exposure from the fraudulent down payment. The conversation was clearly not going well. "We have 48 hours to pay back the stolen down payment, or they'll initiate foreclosure proceedings," he announced when he hung up. "Diana, we're going to lose everything because of your lies." But Attorney Campbell had better news than Marcus expected. "Mr. Brooks, if you cooperate fully with the restitution process and can document that you weren't aware of the fraudulent funding source, you may be able to avoid personal criminal liability. The mortgage company will likely work with you on a payment plan rather than foreclosure if you're proactive about resolving the situation." Over the next 3 hours, we worked out a comprehensive restitution plan. Diana and Marcus would sell their house and use the proceeds to repay the stolen family funds. Diana would provide complete financial disclosure to ensure no other family money had been misappropriated. And most importantly, our father would finally receive the professional care he needed, funded by the money Diana was returning. The family meeting ended with Diana agreeing to all the restitution terms and apologizing to each family member individually. Marcus announced that he was filing for separation, while Diana addressed her financial and psychological issues, but he committed to helping ensure the stolen money was returned. 6 months later, Diana had completed the restitution process and was living in a modest apartment while working a legitimate full-time job in marketing. She'd enrolled in financial counseling and was slowly rebuilding relationships with family members based on honesty rather than manipulation. Our father was thriving in a quality-assisted living facility that provided the medical support he needed while respecting his independence. Marcus and Diana were working on rebuilding their marriage through couples therapy with a focus on financial transparency and honest communication. The process was difficult, but both of them were committed to creating a relationship built on truth rather than elaborate deceptions. The most important outcome was that our family learned the difference between generosity and enabling. We established clear boundaries around financial support while maintaining the love and care that had always connected us. Diana's criminal behavior had been devastating, but it also taught us the importance of accountability and transparency in family relationships. As for Diana's original invoice claiming I owed her $29,000, Attorney Campbell framed it and hung it in her office as an example of how family financial disputes can reveal much deeper problems than simple disagreements about money. The life lesson I learned from this experience was profound, true generosity flows from love. Not obligation, and protecting yourself from financial manipulation doesn't make you less caring. It ensures your ability to help others continues while maintaining the healthy boundaries that make genuine relationships possible. Diana learned an even more important lesson. Building the life you want requires honest work and authentic relationships, not elaborate schemes to extract money from the people who love you. The shortcuts she'd taken had nearly destroyed her marriage, her family relationships, and her freedom. But with commitment to change and genuine accountability, Even the most damaged relationships could be rebuilt on a foundation of truth and mutual respect. Today, our family gatherings are smaller but more genuine. Diana's invoice taught us all the difference between keeping score and keeping faith, and why financial transparency is essential for maintaining trust in any relationship. We learned that love isn't measured in dollars spent or gifts given, but in the willingness to be honest, accountable, and genuinely supportive of each other's success. Have you ever had a family member or close friend who tried to manipulate your generosity or turn your kindness against you? How did you handle the situation, and what did you learn about setting healthy boundaries in relationships? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if Diana's story helped you understand the importance of financial accountability in families. I want to thank everyone who watched this entire story and took the time to reflect on the lessons it contains. Remember that protecting yourself from manipulation isn't selfish. It's necessary for maintaining your ability to genuinely help the people you love. Subscribe for more stories about family dynamics, financial relationships, and the courage it takes to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Share this video with anyone who might be dealing with similar family financial manipulation. And remember that true family relationships are built on love, honesty, and mutual respect, not on keeping track of who owes what to whom. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people you love, and never let anyone convince you that kindness requires you to accept dishonesty or abuse.